Welcome to another deep dive. Looks like today we'll be looking at some excerpts you sent over from a chapter all about enactive learning.
Yes.
And it's part of a larger book that you have there on social learning theory.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be a really fascinating discussion. I think especially since you're a philosopher, this is going to be right up your alley. We're going to unpack how our actions and the consequences kind of shape our understanding of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so interesting about enactive learning is, it's more than just passively absorbing information. It's how we actively engage with the world
Okay.
and, experience the outcomes of our choices.
Right.
And then use those outcomes to kind of guide our future actions.
So it's more than just trial and error,
Yeah.
right? We're not just like blindly stumbling around. We're trying to make sense of that feedback we're getting.
Absolutely.
And that sense-making is where the learning is really happening.
Yeah, it's about how we form conceptions and rules based on those outcomes. Like, for example, if you imagine you're trying to learn how to ski,
Okay.
you can read all the books and watch all the videos you want. But
Wow.
until you actually get out there and strap on those skis and experience the feel of the snow and the balance and the feedback of your movements,
Yeah.
you're not truly learning.
That's such a good example. It really highlights how important that direct experience is.
Yeah.
But here's where I think it gets interesting, and I think this will resonate with you as a philosopher. This text argues that conscious awareness is a key component of enactive learning.
Yeah.
So it's pushing back against this idea that, learning is purely unconscious, like behaviorism suggests.
Yes, absolutely. And there's research to support that as well. Like, for example, there are studies that have shown that, when people are informed of the correct behavior beforehand, they change instantly.
Oh.
But those left to figure it out through trial and error take much longer, suggesting that, simply going through the motions isn't enough.
Right.
We need to be aware of that relationship between our actions and the outcomes in order to learn effectively.
That makes me think about, like, all those times I've tried to learn something new and I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
And then someone explained, like, the underlying principle, and it's like, oh,
Exactly.
like suddenly the light bulb goes off.
Yeah, precisely. And the text also highlights the role of belief in shaping our learning experiences. So there's this fascinating study where people were, they were rewarded on the same schedule, but those who believed they were on a different reward schedule actually performed differently.
Interesting.
So suggesting that our beliefs about the world can actually overshadow the actual outcomes.
So you're saying our perception of reality can be just as powerful as the reality itself when it comes to shaping our behavior.
It is, yeah. And it raises all these important questions about how we form beliefs, how those beliefs influence our actions, and ultimately how we, understand the world.
For sure. Now, this text also doesn't shy away from the kind of challenges of enactive learning.
Right.
For example, it talks about this concept of illusory contingencies. So basically our tendency to see patterns where none exist.
Right.
So, like, I might start believing that wearing a certain shirt brings me good luck, even though it's just coincidence.
Yeah, exactly. And those illusory contingencies often arise because real-world events are complex.
Yeah.
And variable, right? So it can be difficult to isolate the true causes and effects when there's so much going on.
Right. So how do we differentiate then between genuine learning and just falling prey to those illusions?
Right.
It sounds like from the text, maybe paying attention to the consistency of outcomes is important.
Exactly. Looking for those reliable patterns, those connections that hold true, over time and across different situations.
But even then, it's not always easy.
Right.
Because the text also points out that ambiguity and kind of mixed outcomes can make learning harder. Like, negative feedback tells us what doesn't work,
Right.
but not necessarily what does work.
This is where it gets even trickier, right? Because sometimes we settle for a good enough solution because we've kind of hit a wall.
Right.
And we're not sure where else to go. But what if there's a better solution out there
Right.
that we're missing because we've become complacent with what's just good enough?
It's like success can be a barrier to further learning.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
We might stop exploring and experimenting once we found something that works, even if it's not the optimal solution.
And then to complicate matters further, the text highlights how, like, modern technologies, they introduce a whole new layer of complexity.
Right.
Because they often have these delayed consequences that can impact future generations.
Right. And that's where things get really interesting. I think especially from a philosophical perspective, suddenly we have to consider the long-term implications of our actions, even if those consequences aren't immediately apparent.
It's like we're playing a game where the rules are constantly changing and the stakes are incredibly high.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where tools like computer modeling come in.
Okay.
So the text suggests that we can use these models to, simulate the effects of our choices without having to actually carry them out in the real world.
So we can kind of test drive different scenarios and see what happens without having to deal with real-world consequences. That sounds incredibly powerful, but also a little bit dangerous.
It is a powerful tool, no doubt, but as the text points out, the accuracy of these models depends heavily on, the underlying theory and programming.
So garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
We can't just blindly trust the output of these models. We have to be critical of the assumptions and data that go into them.
Absolutely. And this is where your perspective as a philosopher becomes so incredibly valuable. We need to think critically about, the nature of knowledge, the limitations of our models, and the ethical implications of using these technologies to shape our understanding of the world.
So it seems like we're constantly walking this tightrope between like trusting our experiences,
Right.
but also acknowledging that our perceptions could be flawed.
Yeah.
So how do we find that balance? Like what can we do to make inactive learning more reliable?
Well, the text suggests a couple of strategies.
Yeah.
And one is to be more conscious of our learning process.
Okay.
It challenges this notion that learning is purely unconscious and automatic,
Right.
and really emphasizes the importance of awareness.
So you mean like actively thinking about the relationship between our actions and the outcomes?
Yes.
Not just going through the motion,
Exactly.
but really trying to understand why things are happening the way they are.
Exactly. The text even uses this term self-monitoring, paying attention to our own actions,
Mm.
the feedback we're receiving, how we're interpreting that feedback.
Right.
It's about becoming more aware of our own cognitive processes.
But isn't there a theory that we don't actually have direct access to our own cognitive processes?
Yeah.
Like we just kind of make up explanations for our actions after the fact.
That's a really interesting point, and it's something that the text addresses pretty directly.
Okay.
There's a whole section actually devoted to debunking that.
Okay. Tell me more.
Well, for starters, the text points out that, if we don't have access to our own cognitive processes,
Right.
how can we even know what those processes are?
Yeah.
It seems like kind of a logical contradiction.
It does. Like, yeah, if you can't observe something, how can you say for sure that it's happening?
Right. And beyond that, there's actually a lot of research that shows that people can, in fact, accurately articulate their thought processes. It's just that the way we ask people to introspect can influence, the results that we get.
So it's all about how you frame the questions.
Exactly, precisely. If you ask somebody to simply describe what they're thinking,
Right.
you're more likely to get an accurate reflection of their cognitive processes than if you ask them to speculate about why they did something.
That's a really interesting nuance of focusing on the what rather than the why can lead to more reliable insights.
Exactly, yeah. And the text argues that this type of introspection, this conscious reflection on our experiences,
Yeah.
can be incredibly valuable for identifying the factors that influence our behavior
Right.
and for refining our understanding of how the world works.
It makes me think about that famous quote by Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's what he was getting at. This idea that we need to actively engage with our own thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, that's a great connection.
Yeah.
And speaking of growth, the text also emphasizes the importance of pushing beyond those good enough solutions.
Yeah.
It acknowledges that finding a solution that works
Right.
can sometimes prevent us from discovering even better solutions.
So it's that paradox we were talking about before where success can be a barrier to further learning.
Right.
But how do we break free from that complacency? Like how do we
Yeah.
stay curious and keep exploring even when we've already found something that works?
Well, the text suggests a few strategies, and one is to actively seek out diverse perspectives and experiences.
Okay.
It's about exposing ourselves to different ways of thinking, different approaches to problem solving.
So getting out our comfort zones.
Yeah,
Surrounding ourselves with people who challenge our assumptions.
exactly.
Seeking out new information, new experiences.
Exactly. And it's not just about, diversity of thought. It's also about diversity of experience.
Yeah.
The text argues that the more varied our experiences are, the more robust and adaptable our learning will be.
So like A philosopher who spends all their time in an ivory tower,
Yeah.
just reading books and contemplating ideas, they might be missing out on some crucial learning opportunities.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
They might be developing, a really deep understanding of certain concepts,
Right.
but without applying those concepts to real world situations.
Yeah.
Their knowledge might be kind of limited in its application.
It's like that old saying, experience is the best teacher.
Exactly. And the text also emphasizes the importance of seeking out feedback,
Okay.
both positive and negative. It's about being open to criticism, being willing to learn from our mistakes, and being able to, adjust our course when things aren't working.
So it's not just about trying things out. It's about, like, paying attention to the results,
Yes.
being willing to admit when we're wrong,
Yes.
and being open to making changes based on that feedback.
Exactly, precisely. And this is especially crucial, I think, when we're dealing with complex situations where, the outcomes of our actions are delayed or uncertain. The text talks about this idea of proximating distal effects,
Okay.
bringing those long-term consequences closer to the present.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure I fully grasp that concept.
So imagine you're trying to make a decision about whether or not to invest in a new technology.
Okay.
On the surface, it might seem like a great idea, right? It promises efficiency, convenience,
Right.
maybe even cost savings. But what are the long-term implications?
Yeah.
What are the potential environmental impacts?
Right.
What are the ethical considerations?
Yeah.
Proximating distal effects means, like, trying to bring those long-term consequences into the present moment, making them feel more real
Okay.
and more relevant to our decision-making process.
So it's like trying to visualize the potential consequences as vividly as possible.
Exactly, yeah. It's about making those abstract future consequences
Right.
feel more concrete and immediate.
This reminds me of something we were discussing earlier,
Yeah.
like the role of belief in shaping our perceptions and behaviors.
Right.
Like if we can change our beliefs, if we can start to believe that those long-term consequences are real and important, maybe that can shift our behavior in a more positive direction.
That's a really powerful insight, and the text actually provides some evidence to support that idea.
Oh, okay.
It describes research showing that people are more likely to take action on climate change, for example,
Okay.
when they believe that their actions can make a difference.
So it's not just about knowing the facts. It's also about believing that we can change those facts.
Exactly, yeah. It's about having a sense of agency, a belief that our actions can actually shape, the course of events.
This is all starting to feel very interconnected.
Yeah.
Our beliefs, our actions, the consequences of those actions, how we interpret those consequences.
It's like a complex web of feedback loops.
Yeah.
Constantly influencing and shielding each other.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And as we, continue to grapple with these complex challenges,
Right.
like climate change,
Yeah.
technological advancements, social justice issues, like understanding this interconnected web
Yeah.
becomes even more crucial.
Absolutely. So as we delve deeper into this topic, I'm kind of curious to explore how these concepts of enactive learning and belief play out in specific examples.
Yeah.
For instance, the text briefly mentions computer modeling as a tool for simulating the effects of our choices.
Yes.
Could we talk more about that?
Yeah, let's dive into that. Computer modeling is an incredibly powerful tool
Okay.
for exploring complex systems
Okay.
and anticipating potential consequences,
Yeah.
especially when those consequences are difficult to observe or predict in the real world.
So it's like creating a virtual laboratory where we can experiment with different scenarios and see how things unfold. Exactly. Yeah. But as we discussed earlier, it's important to remember that these models
Yeah.
are only as good as the data and the assumptions that go into them.
Right.
We need to be critical of the limitations of these models.
Right.
And not treat their outputs as absolute truths.
Right. Because garbage in, garbage out, but when used responsibly.
Yeah.
And critically, these models can provide valuable insights.
Yes.
And help us make more informed decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah. They can help us anticipate potential problems, test out different solutions,
Right.
and ultimately make choices that, lead to more positive outcomes.
But this all raises a really interesting question for me, especially as a philosopher. Like, if our learning is so heavily influenced by our beliefs and our perceptions,
Right.
how can we be sure we're not just creating models that confirm our existing biases?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that these models are actually helping us to understand the world more objectively,
Mm.
rather than just reinforcing our own subjective views.
Yeah, that's a really crucial question. I think it gets to the heart of, a lot of philosophical debates about knowledge and objectivity. The text doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it does suggest that one way to mitigate bias is to be really transparent about the assumptions and the data that go into these models.
So kind of making the whole process more open
Yes.
and accountable, like allowing others to scrutinize the models and point out potential flaws or blind spots.
Exactly. It's about, fostering this culture of critical thinking and constructive criticism. And it's not just about the models themselves. It's also about, being aware of our own biases as we interpret the output of those models.
So we need to be as skeptical of our own interpretations as we are of the models themselves.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly having to second guess ourselves.
It sounds exhausting when you put it like that, but I think it's more about, cultivating a healthy sense of humility. Recognizing that we don't have all the answers and being open to, revising our beliefs in light of new information.
That makes sense. So I guess it's about finding that balance between like confidence and curiosity.
Yes.
Like, being willing to stand by our convictions, but also being open to new perspectives and new evidence.
Exactly. And this brings us, I think, back to the core idea of enactive learning.
Okay.
This constant interplay between action, feedback, and reflection.
Yeah.
It's not a linear process. It's this continuous cycle of experimentation, observation, and adaptation.
So we're always learning, always refining our understanding of the world based on our experiences.
Exactly. Yeah. And that process is never truly finished, right? It's an ongoing journey of discovery.
I really feel like this deep dive has given me a lot to think about. Especially as a philosopher, I'm fascinated by the implications of enactive learning for our understanding of knowledge and reality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if our experiences are so subjective and so influenced by our beliefs, how do we ever arrive at objective truth?
Yeah.
Is it even possible?
That's a really profound question, and one that philosophers have been grappling with, for centuries.
Right.
But what's interesting, I think, is that, enactive learning kind of offers a different perspective on this issue.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing knowledge as something that's static
Right.
and absolute,
Yeah.
it suggests that knowledge is really this dynamic process
Yeah.
of ongoing interaction with the world.
So it's not about finding the right answer, but rather about continually refining our understanding through experience, reflection, and critical thinking.
Exactly, yeah. And that process is always influenced by, our embodiment, our social context, and the tools we use to engage with the world, like language and technology.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful exploration, I think, of enactive learning. And it's really challenged me to think about, how I learn and how my beliefs shape my understanding of the world.
I'm glad to hear that, and I hope it encourages you to approach your own learning experiences with a renewed sense of curiosity and critical awareness.
I definitely will.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating journey. And to our listener out there, thank you for sending in your source material and for diving in with us today. We hope you enjoyed the exploration as much as we have.